The world did not fade to black. It tore open. One moment John, the entity the world knew as Homelander, was standing in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of Vought Tower's upper laboratories, staring down a trembling technician who had fiddled with the wrong dial on the wrong experimental array. The next, the floor dissolved into a screaming kaleidoscope of impossible colors. Gravity inverted. The air tasted of copper and spoiled milk. He tried to fly, to exert his will upon the space around him, but there was no space. Only a crushing, gelatinous pressure that whispered sins against his eardrums in a billion overlapping voices. It felt like being birthed and strangled simultaneously. Then, the pressure expelled him. He slammed into solid matter with the force of a falling meteorite. Stone shattered. The impact cratered a plaza of ancient, polished marble, sending spiderweb fractures racing outward for 50 meters. Homelander groaned, pushing himself up onto his hands. His head swam with a nausea. He hadn't felt since he was a child in the jagged throes of V-injection cycles. He blinked, his blue eyes glowing faintly as they adjusted to the light. This wasn't New York. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, choked with thick, oily smog that smelled of burning incense and charnel ash. Above him, piercing the gloom, were spires. Not skyscrapers. These were gargantuan. Gothic nightmares of ferrocrete and iron, draped in gargoyles and screaming faces, rising kilometers into the smog. The scale was wrong. It was too big, too heavy. "What the hell?" he whispered, standing up in the center of the crater. He brushed dust from his stars and stripes cape. Then the sound hit him. It wasn't the hum of traffic, it was screaming. Thousands of throats, raw with terror. Underlying it was a rhythmic, wet thudding, the sound of meat being struck, and a cacophony of sharp cracks that sounded like gunfire. But harder, he focused his hearing. The auditory input flooded his brain. Kill, maim, burn. For the Prince of Pleasure. Emperor, protect us. Emperor, deliver us. Flay the skin, sing the song, make it loud, make it wet. Homelander levitated out of the crater, hovering 10 feet above the ground. He looked down the massive avenue. It was a massacre. The plaza was filled with people, thousands of them, dressed in ragged gray robes, clutching prayer beads and crude metal staves. They were being herded like cattle by attackers who looked like they had crawled out of a grindhouse horror film. The assailants wore armor made of jagged scrap metal painted in neon pinks and blacks, adorned with flayed skin and speakers that blasted discordant, ear-bleeding static. He watched as one of the attackers, a brute with tubes runneled directly into his skull, revved a sword that was essentially a chainsaw. The weapon roared. The brute swung it into a huddle of kneeling women. Blood sprayed in a high arterial arc, painting the immaculate stone. Homelander's lip curled. Disgust. Not at the death, he had seen death, but at the ugliness of it, the lack of order, the sheer, filth-ridden chaos. These people looked dirty. "Hey!" he bellowed. His voice, amplified by his lung capacity, boomed across the plaza like a thunderclap, drowning out the screams and the revving chain blades. Silence rippled outward from his position. A few hundred yards away, the brute with the chainsword stopped. He turned, his face a ruin of scar tissue and implanted jagged metal teeth. Beside him, taller figure in flowing robes made of stitched human leather turned as well. This one held a staff topped with a speaker that pulsed with purple light. The cultists stared. The pilgrims, those who weren't bleeding out, looked up. They saw a man floating in the air, clad in a suit of deep blue and patriotic red, a golden eagle upon his shoulders, his cape fluttering in a wind that didn't exist. He was clean. He shone with a light that seemed to repel the smog. "Who's in charge of this shit show?" Homelander asked, drifting forward. He crossed his arms. "I'm talking to you, uglies." The slender figure Magister Vorith of the choir tilted his head. His eyes were entirely black, no sclera. He licked his lips with a tongue that was too long, split down the middle. "A new sensation," Vorith hissed, his voice amplified by the speaker. "Staff. A new texture." "English, you idiot," Homelander snapped. "Do you speak it?" Vorith shrieked a sound of pure ecstatic manic energy and pointed his staff at the floating man. "Take him. Strip the flesh, a gift for the Dark Prince." The cultists roared. A dozen of them raised their weapons, autocannons and solid projectile stubbers, and opened fire. Homelander didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He let them shoot. It was good optics. Let the cameras where were the cameras? see that he was untouchable. The bullet struck him. He frowned. These weren't standard 9mm rounds. They hit harder, heavy slugs designed to chew through flak armor. They didn't penetrate his skin, but the impact force was noticeable, like being pelted with rocks by a major league pitcher. One round struck his shoulder pad, scuffing the gold plating. "Okay," Homelander said, his eyes narrowing, the red glow intensified. "You ruined the suit." The air in the plaza suddenly grew hot. The smell of ozone spiked. 2 beams of coherent, intense thermal energy erupted from his eyes. They weren't the quick bursts he used for intimidation. They were lances of annihilation. The beams swept across the front line of the cultists. There was no resistance. The heat vision, powered by his biological rage, hit the cultists at the waist. Flak armor, flesh, bone, and the stone pillars behind them were sheared in half instantly. The top halves of 12 men slid wetly off their bottom halves. Their cauterized torsos hit the ground before their brains registered they were dead. The firing stopped. Homelander dropped his gaze to the Magister. He smiled, a tight, terrifying smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Is that the best you got?" The Magister Vareth did not look afraid. He looked aroused. "Magnificent," the cultist gurgled, stepping over the steaming remains of his minions. "Such purity of hate, such perfection." Vareth raised a heavy pistol, a bolt pistol stolen from an enforcer vault, and fired. The bolt round was different, mass reactive. It struck Homelander squarely in the chest. The explosion staggered him. It didn't pierce his skin, but the detonation felt like a sledgehammer to the sternum. It winded him. He dropped a foot in the air, gasping, eyes widening in genuine shock. It hurt. Not a lot, like a hard slap, but it was pain. He touched his chest. The suit fabric was torn, revealing the pale, invincible skin beneath, now smudged with soot. He looked at the suit on his fingers. Then he looked at Vareth. The narcissist's mask shattered. The god complex fractured into pure infantile rage. "You," Homelander whispered. Then he screamed. "You insignificant insect." He moved faster than the sound of his own movement. A sonic boom shattered the stained glass windows of the nearby cathedral sanctum. He didn't use heat vision. He used his hands. He grabbed the Magister by the intricate blasphemous robes and drove him backward, slamming him through a stone pillar, then another, then into the heavy iron doors of the basilica. The cultist was laughing, coughing up black blood. "Yes, more. The prince watches. The prince sees your..." Homelander punched him. He punched him so hard that Vareth's head didn't just explode. The kinetic transfer liquefied the cultist's upper torso, painting the basilica doors in a fan of gore and bone shards. Homelander stood there, breathing heavily, his gloves dripping with the remains of the heretic. He looked around. The remaining cultists, perhaps 50 of them in this section of the plaza, hesitated. They were fanatics, drug-addled and warp-touched, but the biology of fear was primal. They had just watched their leader turned into paste by a man who moved faster than a bolt shell. "Anyone else?" Homelander asked. His voice was calm now, terrifyingly calm. One cultist screamed and charged. Homelander bisected him with a glance. "Run," Homelander suggested. They broke, the choir of whispered rapture, seeing a predator they could not process, turned and fled into the smoke-choked alleyways. Homelander hovered back up into the air, wiping the blood from his gloves onto his cape. He turned to face the victims. The civilians. There were hundreds of them huddled by the statues of weeping martyrs. They were dirty, emaciated, covered in sores and scars. They looked pathetic, but they were looking at him. All of them were looking at him. Homelander braced himself for the screaming, the running, the confusion. He prepared his standard line. "And I am here to save you." But he didn't need to say it. An old man in the front, wearing the tattered vestments of a ministorum preacher, dropped to his knees. He didn't cower. He wept. He raised shaking hands toward the sky, toward the man floating in the bloody air with the sun eagle on his shoulders. "The saint," the preacher choked out. "The emperor has sent a saint. A living saint, an angel of the throne. He burns with the emperor's light." One by one, then in waves, the crowd dropped. They fell to their knees. They pressed their foreheads against the cold, blood-slicked marble. They began to chant. It wasn't the cheering of a Vought fan club. It wasn't the selfie-snapping frenzy of a red carpet. This was worship, raw, terrified, primal worship. Imperator Illuminatio. Imperator protects Sanctus. Homelander floated there, the adoration washing over him like a warm bath. He could hear their heartbeats. They were synchronized in their devotion to him. They weren't looking at their phones. They were looking at his boots, afraid to look higher, afraid the glory would blind them. A smile crept onto his face, a real one. Back home, he had to poll test his lines. He had to worry about collateral damage lawsuits. He had to worry about Starlight or Butcher making him look bad. Here, he had just turned a man into soup, and they were praying to him for it. He descended slowly, landing softly on the raised dais of the plaza. He stood tall, hands on his hips, cape settling majestically behind him, replacing it with the benevolent, icy blue stare that had sold 1 billion action figures. "You are safe now," Homelander said, his voice projecting perfect reassurance. He walked among them, and they parted like the Red Sea, reaching out just to touch the hem of his cape. "I have come to clean up this mess." A woman, bleeding from a shrapnel wound, grabbed his boot. "Bless me, Lord, bless me before I die." He would have recoiled from the filth. Here, the desperation tasted sweet. It tasted like power. He placed a gloved hand on her head. He didn't know how to heal, so he just played the part. "You are seen," he said. She shrieked in ecstasy, collapsing in a faint. The crowd surged, a wave of adoration. High above, in the swirling energies of the warp that Homelander could not see, something stirred. That jagged, gaping hole of need, that infinite hunger for validation, lit up the Imperium like a flare. Slaaneshi, the Dark Prince, turned its gaze toward Sanctifica Tertius. It did not see a hero. It did not see a villain. It saw a chalice, empty and screaming to be filled. Homelander looked out over the sea of bowing heads, the Gothic spires looming in the distance. The smoke of the burning city. He whispered. The adoration was a drug, and John was overdosing. For 3 hours, he had not moved from the center of the plaza. He hovered a few feet off the ground, arms crossed, cape billowing in the sulphurous updrafts of the burning city. Around him, the pilgrims of Sanctifica Tertius had formed a dense, moaning carpet of humanity. They weren't just kneeling, they were groveling. Some were flagellating themselves with lengths of chain, weeping his praise with every bloody strike. It was grotesque. It was filthy. It was perfect. Sanctus, Sanctus Angelus. Homelander scanned the crowd with X-ray vision, peeling back layers of rags and sores. He saw malnutrition, tumors, parasites. These people were broken livestock, but they looked at him with a fervent, terrifying love that made the focus groups back on Earth look like disinterested casuals. "You're doing great," he said, his voice projecting smoothly over the din. He flashed the smile. Formula 4, the benevolent protector. "Just keep it up. You guys are the real heroes." They wailed louder at his voice. They didn't understand the idiom, but the tone was enough. A man in heavy carapace armor, a local Arbeits judge, judging by the shock maul on his hip and the sheer entitlement of his stride, pushed through the crowd. He was shouting, shoving pilgrims aside with the butt of a combat shotgun. "Disperse. By order of the magistratum, disperse, you filth." The judge reached the edge of the crater Homelander had made. He looked up at the hovering man. The judge was a hard man scarred by decades of suppressing riots, his face a map of brutal authority. He pointed his maul at Homelander. "Unidentified entity. By the authority of the planetary governor and the Holy Ordo, you are to power down and submit for genetic scanning. You are in violation of..." Homelander tilted his head. The smile didn't waver, but the temperature in the plaza dropped 10 degrees. "I'm sorry," Homelander said, descending until he was nose to nose with the judge. He smelled of sweat and old leather. "I must have misheard you. Did you just tell me to submit?" The judge didn't blink. Courage was common in the Imperium. Intelligence less so. You exhibit unsanctioned abilities. You are a potential warp threat. Submit or be purged. Homelander sighed. Disappointed sigh. "I just saved this city," he said, gesturing to the smear of red paste that used to be the Chaos Magister. "I saved your city, and you want to arrest me?" "The Emperor protects," the judge recited, his finger tightening on the trigger of his shotgun. "Not you." That was the wrong thing to say. Homelander's eyes flared red. Wrong answer. The heat vision didn't slice the judge. It engulfed his head. There was a wet pop, a hiss of vaporizing fluid, and the judge's headless body stood there for a second, shotgun clattering to the stones, before collapsing. Silence slammed into the plaza. Homelander looked at the crowd. His heart hammered. Did I go too far? Will they run? Back home? This would be a PR nightmare. He'd have to spin it. Blame a villain, leak a tape to distract the media. A pilgrim near the front, face caked in ash, pointed a trembling finger at the smoking corpse of the judge. He tested the saint. The pilgrim shrieked. He lacked faith. The angel judged him. Judged him. Another voice cried, Purge the unbeliever. The crowd roared its approval. They surged forward not to attack Homelander, but to kick and spit on the corpse of the man who had dared to question their savior. Homelander blinked. A laugh bubbled up in his chest, a genuine, bewildered, delightful laugh. They like it. They didn't care about due process or morality. They cared about strength. Yeah, Homelander said, his grin widening, showing teeth. Yeah, that's right. He didn't believe. And you know what happens to people who don't believe in me? A god in the smog. They burn. Inquisitor Vela Carentes watched the picked feed on the Strategium hololith. The image was grainy, captured by a servo skull, hovering 3 kilometers away from the plaza. But the resolution was clear enough. She saw the man in the blue suit. She saw the red beams of light. She saw the execution of the Arbite's judge. Readings, she snapped. Her retinue was a bustle of activity. Priests with mechadendrites plugged into the cogitator banks were chanting in binary, their metal limbs twitching as they processed the data. No psychic signature detected. Inquisitor Magos biologist. X-99 droned. Subject exhibits biological heat generation. Flight mechanism unknown. No anti-gravitic engine. No wings. Is it a null? Carentes asked. A blank? Negative. The warp does not recoil from him. It ignores him. Or rather, he interacts with the materium in a way that bypasses standard etheric laws. Carentes narrowed her eyes. She was a woman of sharp angles and sharper intolerance, wearing a long coat of Grok's hide over power armor, a condemner bolt gun magnetized to her thigh. She had hunted witches for 80 years. She knew the smell of the archenemy. This didn't smell like a daemon. Daemons were made of metaphor and emotion. This thing was meat. He accepts worship, Carentes noted, her voice cold. He executes imperial law enforcement. He stands atop a holy site and preens like a peacock. The locals are declaring him a saint, my lady, her interrogator whispered, looking fearful. The reports, they say he descended from a rift in the sky. The rift is a wound in reality, Carentes said. Anything that crawls out of a wound is an infection. Prepare my Valkyrie, alert the Scions, and send a priority astropathic hymn to the Black Templars' crusade fleet in the subsector. The Astartes, Lady Inquisitor for one man. Carentes looked at the man on the screen, who was currently letting a weeping woman kiss his boots. Hubris attracts the dark gods like blood in the water, she said. If he is not a daemon yet, he will be soon. We purge him now before he realizes what he truly is. Homelander was getting bored of the touching. The novelty of the groveling was wearing off, replaced by the irritation of their filth. He wanted a shower. He wanted a burger. He wanted someone to bring him a microphone so he could address the planet properly. Where are the cameras, he thought, scanning the Gothic skyline. Where is the media? Surely they have television here. A low hum vibrated in his chest. He looked up. Cutting through the smog were 3 aircraft. They were ugly, blocky things. Valkyrie assault carriers, with vector thrust engines rotating for descent. They were painted in storm gray and crimson, bearing a symbol he didn't recognize. A stylized eye with a skull in the center. Finally, Homelander muttered. The press, the crowd quieted, looking up in fear. They knew that symbol. The lead Valkyrie roared overhead, its side doors sliding open. Ropes dropped. Figures clad in heavy carapace armor and enclosed helmets slid down with practiced efficiency. These weren't the ragged militia from earlier. These were Tempestus Scions, the elite. They hit the ground in a perimeter formation, hellguns raised, cables connecting their weapons to backpack power cells humming with lethal charge. Homelander floated down to meet them, fixing his hair. Okay, give me some space. Waving them back, he turned to the soldiers. I assume you boys are here to escort me to the governor-president. Whoever runs this dump. The soldiers didn't answer. They didn't lower their weapons. From the lead aircraft, which had landed on the far side of the plaza, a woman stepped out. She walked with a cane that tapped rhythmically on the stone, flanked by 2 floating skulls that buzzed with mechanical chatter. Inquisitor Carentes stopped 10 meters from him. She looked him up and down. her face unimpressed. Identification, she demanded. Her low Gothic was accented, sharp, and guttural. Homelander's smile faltered. Excuse me, you are an unsanctioned psyker operating on a shrine world. You have executed an Adeptus Arbites official. You have incited a riot. Identify yourself and surrender for purgation. Homelander laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous bark. Lady, look around you. I just saved these people. I killed the bad guys. I am the Homelander. Homelander is not a name recorded in the book of saintly lineage, Tertius said. She raised her hand. The scions tightened their aim. You are a heretic, a false idol. Homelander's face went rigid. The tick in his jaw started. Heretic. False. I'm not a heretic, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I'm the only thing standing between you and those freak shows with the chainsaws. You should be thanking me. You should be on your knees. The Emperor demands no knees, but those bent in his name, Tertius retorted. She drew her bolt pistol. Scions. Target the witch. Fire. Time seemed to slow for Homelander. He saw the fingers tightening on the triggers. He saw the glowing coils of the hellguns flare. They're actually going to shoot me. The audacity was so profound it circuited his narcissism and went straight to homicide. Do it. 12 hellguns fired simultaneously. These were not flashlights. They were high-amperage laser carbines designed to punch through carapace armor and ceramite. The beam struck Homelander's chest, his shoulders, his face. The heat was intense. It stung sharp, biting pain like a dozen soldering irons pressed against his skin. His suit smoked, the fabric disintegrating instantly where the beams hit. His skin reddened, blistering slightly under the sustained assault. Homelander grunted, stumbling back a step. He raised a hand to shield his eyes. That hurts, he screamed. He dropped his hand. His face was red, his hair singed, and his eyes were twin stars of hate. You morons. He moved. He didn't fly. He lunged. He closed the distance to the nearest scion in a blur. His fist went through the soldier's chest plate like it was wet cardboard. He ripped the man's heart out along with his spine and threw the gore, slicked mess at the Inquisitor. The scions were disciplined, but they were fighting a hurricane. Homelander backhanded another soldier, sending him flying into a stone pillar with enough force to liquidate his internal organs inside his armor. The body slid down the stone, leaving a wet trail. Contact! Contact! A scion shouted, his voice cracking over the vox. Target is Omega level. Weapons ineffective. Repeat. Weapons. Homelander grabbed the scion's hellgun by the barrel. He squeezed. Then he grabbed the scion's helmet with both hands. Shut up, Homelander whispered. He squeezed. The helmet collapsed inward. The crunch was sickeningly audible. Inquisitor Tertius didn't flinch. She tracked him with her bolt pistol, firing round after round. The bolts exploded against his chest, staggering him, bruising him, tearing his suit to shreds until he was standing bare-chested, his skin mottled with black and blue impact trauma. He turned to her, panting. He was hurt. He was bleeding from a cut on his lip where shrapnel had caught him, but he was smiling again. A broken, jagged smile. Is that it? He asked, walking toward her. Is that all your little toy guns can do? Tertius ejected her mag and slammed a new one home. These were Kraken penetrator rounds. Demon, she spat. The Grey Knights will banish you back to the warp. I don't know what a Grey Knight is, Homelander said, stopping 3 feet from her. His eyes glowed red, illuminating her face. And I don't care. He reached out. A shimmering force field, a Rosarius generator hidden in her gorget, flared to life, stopping his hand inches from her throat. Homelander frowned. He pushed. The field sparked. Cute, he muttered. He intensified the heat vision. He poured everything he had into the invisible barrier. The air screamed as the temperature skyrocketed. The Inquisitor's field flickered, whining in protest. Tertius watched him, sweat beading on her brow, her eyes wide. She saw the madness in him, the purity of his ego. You are nothing, she whispered over the roar of the energy discharge. The field shattered. Homelander's hand closed around her throat. He lifted her off the ground. I'm the Homelander, he hissed, his face inches from hers, and I can do whatever the hell I want. He tightened his grip. He dropped the Inquisitor's limp body onto the stones. He looked up at the remaining scions, who were backing away, their discipline shattering in the face of this impossible violence. Behind them, The pilgrims were silent, watching with wide, terrified eyes. He looked at the crowd. She was a traitor, he declared, his voice shaking slightly with adrenaline. She was working with the bad guys. You saw it. She attacked me. He pointed a shaking finger at the scions. Kill them, he commanded the crowd. Kill them all. For a second, nobody moved. Then the madness took hold. The mob surged forward, thousands of bodies pressing against the handful of elite soldiers, cutting down dozens, but they were swarmed, dragged down, and torn apart by bare hands and rocks. Homelander floated up, above the carnage, above the screams. He watched the slaughter. His suit was ruined. He was bruised. His lip was split. But down below, amidst the butchery, they were still chanting his name. The categorization of John as a demon did not happen in a courtroom or a debate hall. It happened in the cold binary logic of the inquisitorial cogitators, aboard the Purity's lament. With Inquisitor Carentes dead, her vitals flatlining instantly after the crushing of her windpipe, the command protocol shifted automatically to her second-in-command. Interrogator Voss. He reviewed the picked feeds of the entity, the red eyes, the flight without wings, the invulnerability to hellgun fire, and most damningly, the demand for worship. There was no box in the Imperial form for superhuman mutant. There was only man, Genos, and daemon. And no man could do what this creature did, therefore it was a daemon. And the thousands of citizens screaming its name in the plaza were not victims. They were cultists. The logic of the Imperium was a heavy rusted door slamming shut. There was no saving the population of District Primus. There was only containment. Homelander sat on the high altar of the Cathedral of St. Oryx, picking dried blood from his fingernails. He had broken the statue of the Emperor that once occupied the dais skeletal, depressing thing that he found personally offensive, and dragged a velvet, cushioned throne from the Cardinal's private chambers to take its place. Below him, the nave was packed with the terrified, the desperate and the mad. They were chanting his name, a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrated in the floorboards. Homelander. Homelander's savior. It was intoxicating. It was better than the Vought rallies. These people didn't need to be bribed with merchandise. They loved him because he had ripped a woman's head off to protect them. That was a purity of devotion he had never tasted before. My lord, Archdeacon Malthil whispered, stepping up to the dais. The priest's robes were splattered with the gore of the scions, but he wore it like holy vestments. The voxcasters outside. You must hear this. Homelander frowned, his reverie broken. Drifting past the shattered stained glass to the balcony overlooking the city. The smog was thick, illuminated by the orange glow of fires burning in the lower districts. But cutting through the crackle of flames was a voice, amplified to ear-splitting volume by city-wide siren towers. Attention, citizens of Sanctifica Tertius. You are guilty of consorting with the arch-enemy. The entity known as Homelander is a demon of the warp, a guise of the dark gods sent to test your faith. You have failed. Homelander's hands gripped the stone railing of the balcony. The stone turned to powder in his grip. By edict of the Holy Ordo Hereticus, District Primus is declared perdita. All citizens are to remain in their habitations and await purgation. Repent in death. Demon, Homelander whispered. The word tasted like bile. They think I am a demon. It was the ultimate insult. He wasn't a monster from hell. He was the pinnacle of evolution. He was America's son. He was better than them. To be categorized as some filthy, biblical boogeyman was a rejection of his entire identity. It denied his perfection. Then the shelling started. It wasn't a precision strike against him. It was an indiscriminate barrage. Earthshaker cannons from the planetary defense batteries, retasked by the interrogator, opened fire on the pilgrim slums surrounding the cathedral. Homelander watched as a hab block 3 streets away evaporated in a cloud of masonry and pink mist. Thousands of voices, his worshippers, were silenced in a heartbeat. No, twin fusion reactors reaching critical mass. They're mine. You don't break my toys. He launched himself from the balcony. The sonic boom shattered every remaining window in the cathedral, raining glass down on his own flock, but he didn't look back. He tore through the sky, a red and blue blur of pure narcissism and rage. The inquisitorial forces had established a cordon line 2 kilometers out. Chimera armored transports and Taurox APCs formed a wall of steel, supported by platoons of stormtroopers and hardened enforcers. They were methodically advancing, flamers belching promethium into hovels, burning the taint out of the city. They weren't fighting an army. They were exterminating a population. Homelander hit the cordon line like a kinetic strike. He landed on the turret of a lemon rust battle tank that had been requisitioned for the purge. The impact crumpled the turret ring, jamming the cannon. The tank commander popped the hatch, shouting orders, only to find a glowing red god standing on his vehicle. "I am not a stupid daemon," Homelander screamed. He grabbed the tank commander by the torso and pulled. The man came apart at the waist, entrails steaming in the cold air. Homelander didn't stop. He stomped his foot, driving his boot through the hull of the tank, crushing the driver inside. He ripped the heavy bolter from its pintle mount and threw it at a nearby chimera with such force that it punched through the troop compartment, killing everyone inside. The Imperial line erupted in panic. "Contact! The demon is here. Open fire." The air filled with the snap, hiss of lascans and the roar of heavy bolters. Hundreds of beams converged on him. They scorched his suit, burning away the cape, leaving him shirtless and smoking. The pain was real, like a swarm of angry hornets stinging him all at once, but it only fueled the fire in his mind. He unleashed the heat vision. He didn't aim. He just swept his gaze across the line of infantry. Men screamed as they were cut in half. Flak armor offered no resistance to the thermal intensity he was projecting. The smell of cooked meat filled the street, overpowering the incense. It was a slaughter, a massacre. And as the bodies piled up, as the blood ran into the gutters, something shifted in the air. The colors of the explosion seemed too bright, too vivid. The screams of the dying soldiers didn't sound like agony anymore. They sounded like a choir, a harmonious symphony of excess. Homelander felt a rush of endorphins that had nothing to do with adrenaline. He felt perfect. He felt adored. In their dying moments, were focused entirely on him. Their fear was a form of worship. Yes, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. Not a thought, but a feeling. "Make them scream your name. Look at me," Homelander roared, grabbing a stormtrooper by the throat. The soldier was chanting the litany of warding, tears streaming down his face behind his visor. Homelander crushed the helmet, silencing the prayer. "Look at me when you die." Easily. He tore the turret off another tank and used it to batter a squad of enforcers into a fine red paste. He was covered in blood, his hair matted with it, his chest heaving. The sheer physical exertion was unlike anything he faced on Earth, but he had never felt more alive. But the Imperium was vast, and its hatred was infinite. High above, in the circling Valkyries, Interrogator Voss watched the slaughter. He saw the demon tear through a platoon of elite scions as if they were paper. He saw the way the creature reveled in the gore, the way the warp seemed to thicken around him, the shadows stretching too long, the blood taking too long to dry. "It feeds on the violence," Voss realized, his hand trembling as he keyed the Vox. "Conventional arms are ineffective. We are merely offering it sacrifices." "Sir," the pilot of the command Valkyrie called out, "Auspex shows the taint spreading. The cathedral. The pilgrims. They are beginning to mutilate themselves in its name. The corruption is exponential." Voss closed his eyes. He knew what he had to do. The local forces were insufficient. The entire planet would fall to the Ruinous Powers within the week. He needed a hammer. He needed the angels of death. "Pull back the cordon," Voss ordered. "Switch to containment bombardment only. Do not engage the entity directly. Sir, we're retreating." "We are buying time," Voss said grimly. He turned to the astropathic choir servitor bolted to the bulkhead of the Valkyrie. "Send a priority extremist signal to the Sigismund's wrath. Tell the Black Templars that a daemon prince manifests on Sanctifica Tertius. Tell them the innocent are already lost. Tell them we require the Emperor's judgment." Down in the burning streets, Homelander stood amidst the wreckage of the convoy. The surviving soldiers were retreating, falling back under the cover of smoke grenades, wiping blood from his eyes. He waited for them to come back. He waited for the next wave. "Run," he screamed at their retreating backs. "Run back to your Emperor. Tell him I am coming for him next." He threw his head back and laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. The corruption was subtle, insidious. He didn't feel evil. He just felt justified. He felt that finally the world was treating him with the gravity he deserved. If they wanted a monster, he would be the greatest monster they had ever seen. He flew back to the cathedral, trailing smoke and blood. As he landed on the dais, the congregation fell silent. They saw him stripped to the waist, his skin bruised and blackened, bathed in the blood of his enemies. He looked horrific. Archdeacon Malthal fell to his knees, weeping with joy. Behold, he has judged the oppressors and found them wanting. Homelander sat on his throne. He felt a strange itch in his mind, a desire for something. More screaming, more praise. The blood on his hands tasted sweet when he licked a drop from his thumb. "They called me a demon," Homelander said softly to the room of thousands. "Lies," the crowd roared. "They want to hurt you because you love me." "We die for you," they screamed back. His eyes glowed, but the red was darker now, tinged with a sickly violet hue that no one noticed in the gloom. "Good," he said, "because the next time they come, I want you to kill them for me." Outside the atmosphere, the warp engines of a strike cruiser tore a hole in reality. The Black Templars had arrived, and they did not bring handcuffs. The sky above the burning cathedral did not darken. It shattered. The low, oppressive cloud cover of Sanctifica Tertius was suddenly punctured by streaks of atmospheric re-entry fire. Dozens of them, descending with the terrifying velocity of meteors. There was no warning siren this time, no broadcasted demand for surrender. The Black Templars did not negotiate with daemons. They simply arrived to kill them. Homelander stood on the precipice of the shattered balcony, chest heaving, his blue eyes tracking the fiery contrails. He felt a tremor in the air, a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated in his teeth. These weren't the clumsy dropships of the Inquisition. These were drop pods, armored coffins of ceramite and adamantium, fired directly from the bombardment decks of the Sigismund's Wrath. They slammed into the plaza below with earth-shattering force, cratering the marble, crushing the statues of martyrs, and liquefying the unfortunate cultists who had gathered to pray at the crater's edge. Dust and pulverized stone erupted in a choking gray wave. More soldiers. Homelander spat, wiping a smudge of soot from his bare, bruised chest. "When will you idiots learn?" The sides of the drop pods blew open with explosive bolts. From the smoke emerged giants. They were 8 feet tall, encased in power armor blacker than the void, draped in tabards of cream cloth and chains of binding iron. Their helms were snarling facsimiles of knights, their eyes glowing red lenses. They did not shout orders. They did not seek cover. They ignited chainswords that roared like tortured engines and raised bolt rifles the size of mortal torsos. Abhor the witch. Destroy the witch. The roar was not human. It was a post-human basso profondo, amplified by vox grills, a wall of sound that hit Homelander with physical force. Homelander sneered and launched himself from the balcony. He broke the sound barrier instantly, a red and blue blur aiming for the lead giant. He expected what always happened. The target would turn into red mist, the armor would crumple like foil, and the others would scream in terror. He slammed his fist into the helmet of the lead Templar, a sword brother named Kalen. The impact was thunderous, but Kalen did not explode. The ancient ceramite of his helmet cracked, the lenses shattered, and the Astartes was hurled backward, 50 feet, smashing through a stone pillar. But he didn't liquefy. His neck snapped. Yes, but the body remained intact. It was like punching a main battle tank wrapped in meat. Homelander hovered, blinking in genuine confusion. His hand hurt. Why did that hurt? The air was filled with explosive death. The remaining 9 Astartes in the squad opened fire. These were not las beams. They were mass-reactive bolter shells, .75 caliber rocket, propelled grenades. They struck Homelander with the force of a collapsing building. The explosion staggered him. He was knocked out of the air, crashing onto the rubble-strewn pavement. The shells didn't just bruise. They detonated against his skin, sending shockwaves through his internal organs. He coughed, and for the first time in his life, he tasted the copper tang of his own blood in his throat. Target marked. A Templar intoned, his voice devoid of fear. "Purge the unclean." Homelander scrambled up, his vision blurring. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded his system. "You think you can hurt me?" He unleashed his heat vision. The twin beams struck a charging initiate in the chest. The ceramite breastplate glowed cherry red, then white, then liquefied. The Marine didn't stop. He kept running, his chest melting, his fused ribcage boiling, shouting a litany of hate until the beam finally severed his spine and he collapsed, still tried to crawl forward. They didn't stop. They didn't care. Realizing with a spike of cold dread that staying on the ground was suicide, he strafed the plaza, cutting down 3 more Marines, bisecting them at the waist. But for everyone he killed, 2 more drop pods slammed down. The plaza was filling with black armor. 50. 100. He was faster than them. Much faster. He wove between the bolt of fire. a hawk among wolves, striking and retreating. He grabbed a Templar by the jetpack vents, flew him up 10 stories, and spiked him into the ground. He ripped the arm off another and beat him to death with it. But the sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. A plasma gunner caught him in a glancing shot. The star-hot energy didn't just burn, it vaporized the top layer of skin on his left shoulder, leaving a raw, weeping burn that screamed with agony. "Ah, shit!" Homelander shrieked, clutching his shoulder. He hovered behind a gargoyle, panting. "What are you things?" "We are his angels," a voice boomed from below. Castellan Aldrich Varanthor had deployed. He pointed a power sword wreathed in a disruption field at the hiding. "God, and you are nothing but a war spasm. Face your judgment." Homelander looked down. He saw the numbers. There were nearly 200 of them now, securing a perimeter, setting up heavy bolters, moving with a synchronized lethality that made the Vought tactical teams look like children playing with Nerf guns. They were slaughtering his congregation, his worshippers, with efficient, brutal chops of their chainswords, clearing the chaff to get a clear shot at him. Homelander yelled, diving back into the fray. He didn't care about the people, he cared that they were his. He tackled Varanthor. The Castellan was a master swordsman with a century of combat experience, but he couldn't track a supersonic object at point-blank range. Homelander slammed into him, driving him into the pavement. He raised his fists to pound the Space Marine into dust, but Varanthor was fast too. The transhuman reflex speed kicked in. The Castellan blocked the first punch with his storm shield. A crack of thunder echoed as the force field absorbed the blow and thrust upward with his power sword. The blade, surrounded by a matter-disrupting energy field, sliced through Homelander's oblique muscle like a scalpel through silk. Homelander screamed, a high, shrill sound of pure shock. He rolled away, clutching his side. Bright red, human blood seeped between his fingers. He stared at it. "I am bleeding. I am actually cut." "He bleeds!" Varanthor shouted, rising to his feet, his shield sparking. "If he bleeds, he can die. Press the attack for Sigismund. For the Emperor." The psychological armor cracked before the physical body did. Homelander backed away, eyes wide. They weren't afraid of him. He had lasered them, crushed them, dropped them from the sky, and they just kept coming. They viewed him not as a god, but as a target, a task to be completed. Then the ground shook. From the smoke of the landing zone, heavy footsteps thudded. A massive shape emerged, crashing through the ruins of a statuary wall. It was a boxy, walking sarcophagus of adamantium and hatred, twice the height of a man, mounted on piston-driven legs. On one arm, it bore a twin-linked las cannon. On the other, a massive power fist size to crush tank hulls. Venerable Brother Thessarian, a dreadnought of the Black Templars, had awakened. "I have awakened to purge." The dreadnought's voice amplifier boomed, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. "Where is the filth?" Homelander hovered, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the machine. "What the hell is that?" The Sarian's sensors locked onto the heat signature of the flying man. The twin las cannons whined. 2 beams of high-intensity laser energy slammed into Homelander. He tried to dodge, but he was sluggish from pain and shock. The beams caught him mid-air, hammering him backward into the cathedral facade. Stone exploded. He fell 50 feet, crashing onto the steps of his own church, tumbling through the debris. He groaned, trying to rise. His vision was swimming. His side was burning. His shoulder was raw meat. "Get up," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "Get up, you are the Homelander, you are the—" His shadow fell over him. 5 Terminators teleported in with a flash of ozone and displaced air. They were hulking mountains of tactical dreadnought armor, wielding thunder hammers and storm shields. They formed a semicircle around him. Behind them, the dreadnought stomped closer, crushing the bodies of the faithful under its massive feet. Homelander scrambled backward on his hands and heels, kicking at the stone. For the first time in his life, he looked small. "Stay back." His eyes flared red, but the intensity was flickering, his stamina draining. He fired a beam at the lead Terminator. The Terminator raised his storm shield. The beam struck the energy field and splashed harmlessly aside. The Terminator advanced, raising a thunder hammer crackling with disruptive energy. "The witch tires." Homelander flew at him, desperation fueling his muscles. He ducked under the hammer swing. The air pressure alone nearly knocked him out, and uppercut the Terminator. The helmet flew off, revealing a scarred, pale face that snarled at him. Even as the jaw was unhinged, Homelander grabbed the Terminator and threw him into the others, knocking them down like bowling pins. He turned to run, to fly, to get to orbit anywhere but here. But the Dreadnought was there. The Sarian swung his power fist. It wasn't a punch, it was a collision. The hydraulic claw caught Homelander mid-takeoff. It clamped around his waist. Homelander howled as ribs snapped. The pressure was immense. He hammered his fists against the Dreadnought's chassis, denting the armor, tearing away sensory cables, but the machine did not let go. "Your existence is an insult to the Omnissiah," the Sarian boomed. The Dreadnought slammed Homelander into the ground. Once, twice, the pavement cracked. Homelander coughed blood, his eyes rolling back. He was stronger than anything they had faced, but he had no technique, no discipline, and no understanding of pain. He summoned one last reserve of hysterical strength. He focused his heat vision on the Dreadnought's visual sensors, melting the glass and blinding the machine. The Sarian roared in mechanical fury, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Homelander tore himself free, leaving scraps of his suit and skin in the clamp. He launched himself upward, screaming, weeping. He didn't stop to kill the rest, who were being systematically butchered by chainswords in the courtyard below. He broke the cloud layer, flying blindly, seeking safety, seeking silence. He was the strongest being on Earth, but on Sanctifica Tertius he was prey. Below him, the Black Templars continued their work. They did not cheer his retreat, they simply reloaded. The Castellan watched the blood trail in the sky and keyed his vox. The quarry is wounded. He flees to the wastes. Deploy the land speeders. The hunt continues. Homelander flew until his lungs burned and his vision grayed out. He crashed into the ash wastes, miles from the city, rolling into a ravine filled with industrial slag and toxic runoff. He lay there in the dark, shivering, clutching his bleeding side. "They hurt me," he whimpered to the toxic wind. "They actually hurt me." In the crushing weight of his defeat, a new voice spoke. It didn't come from the air. It came from the wound in his ego. It was soft, silky, and promised the one thing he wanted more than life itself. "They do not appreciate you, poor thing. But I do. I see your perfection. I can make you whole again. I can make you whole again. I can make you more." Homelander closed his eyes, and he listened. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to summon the memory of the crowds, the applause, the flashbulbs. But all he could see was the red lens of the Dreadnought. All he could feel was the crushing grip of the metal claw. He was small. For the first time since the laboratory, he was just meat. "Poor, sweet thing," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the wind. It came from the marrow of his bones. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, like a mother's lullaby, like a lover's moan, like the roar of a stadium chanting his name, all layered into one silken frequency. Homelander opened his eyes. The gray ash of the ravine was gone. The sky was no longer the color of bruised iron. It was a swirling, hypnotic violet, bleeding into majestic pinks and bruised golds. The toxic sludge pool next to him had become a mirror of polished amethyst. His reflection looked back, but it wasn't the broken, bleeding man in the torn suit. It was him. Perfect golden hair unruffled, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, eyes glowing not with heat, but with a promise of infinite ecstasy. "Look at what they did to you," the reflection said. Its lips not moving, the words echoing directly in his neural pathways. "The insects, the jealous, ugly little insects. They saw your perfection. They hurt me," Homelander whispered, reaching out to touch the reflection. I can't beat them. There are too many. You can't beat them as a man," the voice purred. "Men are finite. Men have limits. Men break. But you were never meant to be a man, John. You were meant to be a god." The pain in his side flared blinding white. He screamed, curling tighter. "Does it hurt?" the voice asked. "Feel. Why is pain different from pleasure? It's all just sensation. It's all just nerves firing. Open yourself to it. Don't push it away. Taste it." Homelander gasped. The concept was alien, repulsive. But the pain was overwhelming. He had no choice. He stopped fighting the agony. He let it in, and as he did, the sensation twisted. The burning in his flank didn't stop, but the context shifted. It became intense. It became electric. It became arousing. The agony was a rush, sharper and deeper than any drug Vought had ever pumped into him. "Yes," the voice cooed. "You feel it. The truth. You want them to love you. They will never love you enough. Their love is weak. But their fear, their agony, That is pure. That is forever. I want. Homelander stammered, his pupils dilating until his eyes were black pits. I want everything. The reflection smiled. Take the perfection. Be the golden calf they accused you of being. Let the galaxy burn in your honor. The reflection reached out of the pool. A hand of perfect alabaster light grasped Homelander's blood-stained glove. Homelander took it. The transformation was instant. The warp did not build, it erupted. A pillar of violet light shot from the ravine, piercing the cloud layer, visible from orbit. The gray ash turned to diamond dust. Homelander screamed, but it was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of birth. His biology, already mutagenic and unstable from Compound V, drank the warp energy like a starving man drinking wine. The wound in his side knit together, leaving not a scar but a mark of beauty. A golden seam in the flesh. His muscles swelled. The torn fabric of his suit did not repair itself, it fused with his skin. The blue neoprene becoming a chitinous, living hide, the eagle on his shoulder morphing into a symbol of avian predatory grace. He stood up. The air around him shimmered with musk and ozone. He flexed his hands. He felt the heartbeat of every living thing on the planet. He felt the fear of the pilgrims in the city miles away. He felt the delicious, spicy hatred of the space marines. He threw his head back and laughed. The sound shattered the canyon walls. I'm ready for my close-up. In the plaza of St. Oryx, the massacre was nearly complete. The Black Templars were thorough. They had established a perimeter around the cathedral and were systematically executing the remaining survivors of the Congregation of the Descended Star. There was no mercy. To worship the false idol was to be tainted beyond redemption. Castellan Aldrich Varanthor stood at the base of the dais, wiping black blood from his power sword. Behind him, venerable brother the Sarian stood guard, his assault cannons cycling down, the barrels glowing red from sustained fire. The area is secured, Castellan, a sword brother reported. No sign of the entity. The Auspex scanners are clear. It fled to the wastes to die, Varanthor said, sheathing his blade. A coward's end for a false god. Burn the bodies. We leave nothing but ash. Brother Castellan, the Sarian's voice box grated. Sensors detecting anomaly. Varanthor looked up. The clouds above the city were swirling. Not the gray smog of industry, but unnatural, roiling clouds of pink and purple lightning. The air pressure dropped so sharply that the pilgrims' ears popped. A scent of perfume and rotten meat flooded the plaza. Warp signature, Varanthor shouted, drawing his bolt pistol. Defensive formation, it returns. It didn't just return, it arrived. There was no sonic boom this time. There was a choir. 1,000,000 voices singing a single perfect note of adoration, and riding that note, descending from the violet clouds like a falling angel, was Homelander. He landed in the center of the plaza, silent as a feather. The Space Marines opened fire instantly. 50 bolters roared. The mass reactive shells streaked toward him. Homelander didn't dodge. He didn't fly. He simply walked forward. The bolts struck him and exploded, but the fire didn't burn him. The shrapnel didn't cut him. The energy washed over his new skin like water over oil. He walked through the curtain of explosions, smiling a smile that had too many teeth, his eyes glowing with a light that was no longer red, but a blinding, agonizing magenta. Is that it? His voice echoed, not from his mouth, but from the air itself. Is that all the love you have to give? He looked at the nearest initiate. He didn't use heat vision, he just looked. The Space Marine screamed. Inside his helmet, his eyes boiled. His brain was flooded with sensory overload, every nerve ending firing at maximum capacity, pleasure and pain indistinguishable. The Marine collapsed, convulsing, tearing off his own helmet to claw at his melting face. Sorcery, Varanthor roared, the Sarian. End him. The Dreadnought pivoted, the twin lascannons aiming for the center of mass. The Sarian fired. The beams that had broken Homelander's ribs an hour ago struck him squarely in the chest. Homelander didn't stagger. He stood there, letting the lasers burn against his chest, absorbing the energy. He laughed, a low, throaty purr. That tickles, Homelander said. He moved. He appeared in front of the Dreadnought. He placed one hand on the massive adamantium chassis. You broke my ribs, Homelander whispered to the machine. That was rude. He pushed. Physics wept. The Dreadnought, weighing 12 tons, was lifted into the air. Homelander didn't just throw it, he tore it. with a wet screech of tearing metal and snapping hydraulics. He ripped the sarcophagus out of the chassis. The Dreadnought's limbs fell limp. Homelander held the central coffin, the limbless torso of the ancient hero inside screaming through the Voxcaster. Failure, failure, the Emperor. Shh. Homelander smiled. He squeezed. Wet fluids leaked between his fingers. He dropped the crushed remains of the venerable brother onto the stones. Silence fell over the plaza. The Black Templars, fearless warriors of 1,000 campaigns, took a step back. They knew no fear, but they knew impossibility when they saw it. He crushed the Sarian, a neophyte whispered. Homelander turned to the Terminators, the elite, the indomitable. They charged him, thunder hammers crackling. Homelander didn't punch them. He unleashed the beams from his eyes. But they weren't straight lines anymore. They were arcs of seeking liquid energy. The violet beams snaked around the storm shields, seeking the gaps in the armor. They cooked the Terminators inside their suits. The ceramite didn't melt. It fused with the flesh beneath, turning the holy warriors into statues of screaming meat. Homelander walked past them toward Castellan Varanthor. The Castellan stood his ground. He activated his power sword, the disruption field humming. He knew he was going to die. But he was a Templar. He would die standing. Daemon. Varanthor spat. You are filth. You are a lie. Homelander stopped a foot away. He loomed over the space marine. The corruption of Slaaneshi had made him taller, broader, more majestic. He radiated a beauty that hurt to look at. I am not a lie, Homelander said softly. I am the only thing that is real. You fight for a corpse on a chair. I fight for this. He gestured to the carnage. Varanthor struck. The power sword swung for Homelander's neck. Homelander caught the blade with his bare hand. The disruption field flared, trying to separate his atoms. Smoke rose from his palm. Homelander didn't flinch. He smiled, his eyes locked on Varanthor's lenses. He squeezed his hand. The ancient power sword, a relic of the chapter, shattered into 1,000 shards. Varanthor stared at the broken hilt. Homelander reached out and gently, almost tenderly, placed his hands on the sides of the Castellan's helmet. Do you love me? Homelander asked. Close enough. Homelander's eyes flared. He didn't crush the helmet. He fired his heat vision through his own hands, superheating the helmet instantly. Varanthor's scream was brief, but horrific as his head was cooked inside the ceramite pot. Homelander let the body fall. He turned to the remaining Templars. There were perhaps 50 left alive. They were firing at him, but the bolts were just confetti now. He felt their despair. Kneel, Homelander commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it hit them with the force of a psychic hammer. They didn't kneel. They were Astartes. They drew combat knives. They prepared to die. Homelander sighed. Fine, the hard way. He moved like a dancer. It was a massacre, but it was artistic. He didn't just kill them, he disassembled them. He wove through their ranks, severing off limbs, severing off, painting the plaza in broad, wet strokes of red and black. He left one alive, a young neophyte, pinned under a fallen pillar, legs crushed. Homelander floated above the carnage, the violet lightning framing him. He looked down at the neophyte. Go back to your ship, Homelander said, his voice echoing from everywhere at once. Tell them I'm keeping this planet. Tell them I'm keeping this planet. Tell them I'm the new management. The surviving pilgrims, those who had hidden in the crypts, were emerging. They saw the dead giants. They saw the golden god floating above the ruin. Archdeacon Malthal crawled out from behind the altar. He looked at Homelander, at the glowing purple eyes, the fused armor, the aura of terrifying majesty. My lord, Malthal wept, prostrating himself. You have returned. Homelander landed on the steps. He looked out at the burning city, at the shattered drop pods, at the dead angels of death. He felt the gaze of Slaaneshi upon him, a warm, possessive weight. He had never been a hero. He realized that now heroes sacrificed, heroes bled. He just took what he wanted. Yes, Homelander said, a smile stretching impossibly wide across his face. And I am never leaving again. The battle for the Plaza of St. Oryx did not end with a treaty. It ended with a feast. The last of the Black Templars, a neophyte named Karras, had been pinned beneath the crushed remains of a rhino transport, his lower body pulverized. He did not beg for mercy. He spat blood and curses at the golden figure hovering above him, reciting the litanies of hate until his lungs failed. But Karras did not die by Homelander's hand. He died when the crowd, the tens of thousands of pilgrims who had once sought the Emperor's light, surged forward like a tide of ecstatic vermin. They tore the space marine apart with improvised tools, with rocks, with their teeth. They stripped the ceramite from his bones as relics and bathed in the gene-enhanced blood, screaming praises to the new angel who hovered above the carnage, watching with a serene, terrifying smile. Homelander floated amidst the rising smoke, his arms spread wide. The air of Sanctifica Tertius had changed. The choking industrial smog was gone, replaced by a thick perfumed mist that tasted of lilac and copper. The sky above had bruised into a permanent, swirling twilight of violet and bruised gold. He felt the planet changing beneath him, the very stones of the cathedral softening, the gargoyles shifting to leer with expressions of debauched pleasure. It was no longer a world of stone and iron, it was a world of flesh and desire, and it was his. Beautiful. Homelander whispered, his voice carrying over the screams of the dying and the orgiastic chants of the living. They finally understand. Beyond the screaming atmosphere, the Imperium prepared its final argument. On the bridge of the strike cruiser Sigismund's Wrath, Shipmaster Varus watched the tactical hololiths with a face made of stone. The ground assault was lost. The Castellan was dead. The Dreadnought was destroyed. The planet's astropathic choir had ceased screaming for help and begun screaming in tongues. The taint was absolute. The corruption reading was off the scale. The planet was no longer just a world, it was a festering wound in reality. The Perdita decree is authorized, Varus said, his voice hollow. Inquisitorial clearance code verified. We cannot allow this cancer to spread to the subsector. Exterminatus. The weapons master asked, his hand hovering over the rune-encrusted key. Cyclonic torpedoes. Varus commanded. Burn the atmosphere. Crack the crust. Let nothing survive to dishonor the Emperor. The ship shuddered as the bombardment bay doors opened. Massive, skyscraper-sized missiles, painted in the black of morning and the red of judgment, were loaded into the launch tubes. The Purity's Lament, the inquisitorial vessel alongside them, began charging its lance batteries to strip the planet's localized shields. The battle for the Plaza of St. Oryx did not end with a treaty. It ended with a feast. The last of the Black Templars, a neophyte named Karras, had been pinned beneath the crushed remains of a rhino transport, his lower body pulverized. He did not beg for mercy. He spat blood and curses at the golden figure hovering above him, reciting the litanies of hate until his lungs failed. But Karras did not die by Homelander's hand. He died when the crowd, the tens of thousands of pilgrims who had once sought the Emperor's light, surged forward like a tide of ecstatic vermin. They tore the space marine apart with improvised tools, with rocks, with their teeth. They stripped the ceramite from his bones as relics and bathed in the gene-enhanced blood, screaming praises to the new angel who hovered above the carnage, watching with a serene, terrifying smile. Homelander floated amidst the rising smoke, his arms spread wide. The air of Sanctifica Tertius had changed. The choking industrial smog was gone, replaced by a thick perfumed mist that tasted of lilac and copper. The sky above had bruised into a permanent, swirling twilight of violet and bruised gold. He felt the planet changing beneath him, the very stones of the cathedral softening, the gargoyles shifting to leer with expressions of debauched pleasure. It was no longer a world of stone and iron, it was a world of flesh and desire, and it was his. Beautiful. Homelander whispered, his voice carrying over the screams of the dying and the orgiastic chants of the living. They finally understand. Beyond the screaming atmosphere, the Imperium prepared its final argument. On the bridge of the strike cruiser Sigismund's Wrath, Shipmaster Varus watched the tactical hololiths with a face made of stone. The ground assault was lost. The Castellan was dead. The Dreadnought was destroyed. The planet's astropathic choir had ceased screaming for help and begun screaming in tongues. The taint was absolute. The corruption reading was off the scale. The planet was no longer just a world, it was a festering wound in reality. The Perdita decree is authorized, Varus said, his voice hollow. Inquisitorial clearance code verified. We cannot allow this cancer to spread to the subsector. Exterminatus. The weapons master asked, his hand hovering over the rune-encrusted key. Cyclonic torpedoes. Varus commanded. Burn the atmosphere. Crack the crust. Let nothing survive to dishonor the Emperor. The ship shuddered as the bombardment bay doors opened. Massive, skyscraper-sized missiles, painted in the black of mourning and the red of judgment, were loaded into the launch tubes. The Purity's Lament, the inquisitorial vessel alongside them, began charging its lance batteries to strip the planet's localized shields. Homelander sat on his throne. It was bone now, the fused bones of the Black Templars and the Inquisitor, shaped by the warpsmiths of his new cult. He looked out over the congregation. There were millions of them now, gathered in the city, chanting his name in a language that hurt the throat to speak. Archdeacon Malthael, now twisted into a shape that was half man, half herald, and his mouth was a permanent rictus of ecstatic praise. "The sky is clear, O Golden One," Malthael rasped. "The false emperor's metal birds are dust. You are the master of the world." "I am," Homelander agreed. He leaned back, resting his chin on his hand. He felt the rush of victory, the high of the slaughter. But as the adrenaline faded, he felt something else. He looked at the map Malthael had laid out on the table of human skin before him. It was a star chart of the Segmentum Tempestus. It showed Sanctifica Tertius, and it showed the others. Thousands of stars, millions of worlds. "This is it?" Homelander asked, pointing at the single dot of his planet. "This is all there is?" "No, my lord," Malthael said, his voice trembling with anticipation. "This is but one grain of sand, the Imperium of the corpse. God spans 1,000,000 worlds. There are trillions of souls who do not yet know your name. Trillions who do not yet love you." Homelander stared at the map. Back on Earth, he had wanted the ratings. He had wanted the polls. He had wanted America. But America was small. Earth was dirt. Here there was an empire of people who worshipped a skeleton because they had no better option, an empire waiting to be broken, waiting to be his. The Slaaneshi void that demanded excess flared to life. It wasn't satisfied with the planet. It wasn't satisfied with the fleet. It wanted more. It wanted everything. Homelander stood up. His eyes blazed with a terrifying, infinite ambition. The corruption was complete. He was no longer a man with superpowers. He was a demon prince in all but name, a creature of pure narcissism weaponized by the dark gods. Tasting the word, he looked at Malthael. "We will go on tour," Homelander said, his smile stretching wide, revealing rows of teeth that were too perfect, too sharp. "Soon." Outside, the Daemon world screamed in joy. The crusade had ended. The long, bloody tour of the galaxy was just beginning. And in the depths of the warp, the laughter of the Dark Prince echoed, loud and long, for he had found his favorite new toy.